Chair. We finally met face to face. I'm excited, SJ. Dear Susan Jane Harrison, thank you for being with us at the International Symposium on Interdisciplinary Performing Arts and Education, and for agreeing to present. I would like to give a special thanks for your warm approach. When I first contacted you via email, it was like I was talking to an old friend. Thank you. We had long correspondence almost every night, sent voice notes. Thank you so much. Let me introduce you to our participants. Susan Jane Harrison is an actor, playwright, voice and performance coach, at the same time public speaking coach. SJ is a British-American playwright and performer who trained as an actor at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art with a Masters of Fine Arts from the University of California at Davis. Unusual collaborations in Harrison's artistic work have allowed her to develop across disciplines. Harrison's work as performer and playwright has been seen in both the United Kingdom, USA, and New Zealand. She has worked in the United Kingdom, most notably with BBC Radio, NBC Theatre Co. and the Royal National. In the USA, with Berkeley Repertory Theatre, Aurora Theatre Company, Women's Wheel, ACT, California Shakespeare Company, and a traveling Jealous Theatre. And now Harrison's presentation title is Voice and Performance Expression and New Psychophysical Trends. We are waiting for your presentation with great interest, SJ. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Marhaba. I am honored to speak to you today on your Saturday morning and my Friday night in California. The pandemic has given me opportunities to connect with people like Dr. Tuchem Carr all over the world, and I'm always impressed by how well people in other countries speak my language. I know that English is a very difficult language, and I will upload a video of this presentation to my YouTube channel with Turkish subtitles sometime in the coming week, and Dr. Tuchem Carr will share that information with you. How are trends created? We create trends by talking about them, as we are doing here today. I think I have seen a new trend when a new idea or a new way of thinking comes to my attention maybe at least 3 times. How we talk about our ideas and how important we think they are creates the trend. When ideas in one area of study connect with ideas in another area, this can be a sign of a powerful trend. The most exciting trend that I see in the US today in science, the arts, and even, believe it or not, in city and state government, not the federal government maybe yet, is that people are opening their minds to holistic thinking. When I say holistic, what do I mean? And in a way, you've touched on this when you're talking about interdisciplinary. That's actually a form of holistic thinking, I believe. And it's very exciting to me what you've been saying here today. The simplest way to explain this is to say separation is an illusion. And that's not really a very simple phrase, but I believe that holistic is the understanding that all parts of a thing or system work together and are connected. You are a human being. If your mind is unhappy, how does this affect your body? If your body is unwell, how does this affect your mind? And of course, your emotions, mind, body, and emotion. Each one of these things affects the others. All of these things are connected. As an expressive performer, singer, or speaker, we must use all parts of ourselves. This makes sense, right? Who could disagree? Well, many of our systems in the US, including modern medicine, have been organized as if everything is separate. Perhaps when we started building complex machines in the 19th century, we started thinking of the body and the person as a machine. If the brakes on a car have worn down, we replace the brake pads. That should fix the problem. This is simple. People are not simple. I'm going to give you a medical example, which I think can also be applied to performance. Imagine that I'm a woman who keeps twisting my ankle. I go to an orthopedist, a person who specializes in bones and joints. They focus on my ankle. They tell me it's weak. Maybe they give me exercises to do, focusing again just on that part of my leg. This doesn't help. Why not? Because they have treated my ankle like it is the brakes on a car. They haven't asked me about the rest of my body. They haven't asked why the ankle is weak. The doctors don't ask any questions about my psychological or emotional response to these accidents. I'm now in a vicious cycle where one thing starts off a chain reaction and everything starts to go wrong. We've all experienced those types of things in our lives in many areas, right? So how do I get out of this vicious cycle? I start working with a holistic health practitioner. There's many different kinds. I learn that my ankle is weak because of how I walk and how I stand. Why do I walk and stand this way? Because my pelvis is out of alignment. How did this happen? It started when I gave birth to my first child. I have tight muscles in the pelvis, and the muscles in my lower leg are overcompensating, working too hard. This is causing repeated ankle sprains. My brain and muscles are used to my ankle being injured, and now I keep seeing these painful ankle sprains happening in my mind over and over again. I've developed trauma around this event. My whole system is now in the habit of twisting my ankle. My practitioner begins to work with the pelvis, and as she works with the pelvis, I might sometimes cry. Emotion has been trapped in the pelvis, and this is released. The pelvic imbalance is the physical source of the ankle sprains, but strong emotions are part of this situation. The problem started with birth trauma. Though it's a natural event, giving birth is also traumatic. What did it mean to me to be a mother for the first time? How did my husband respond to this event? How did my life change after the birth of my first child? Was I suddenly in a situation where I had to repress a lot of difficult emotion? Everything is connected. This is what I mean when I say that separation is an illusion. And finally, relating to voice practice, as you may have been wondering how this relates, there is a physiological connection between the pelvis and the throat. Pushing down emotion can cause us to tighten the muscles in the pelvis and also the throat. If we tense our throat muscles, the pelvis usually tightens too, and vice versa. What do we have in between the throat and the pelvis? Our entire breathing system. And breath is the engine of the voice. Now, I'm briefly going to discuss the American cultural context for holistic practices. And then I will discuss how we can use holistic techniques in performance. America has been a society that is very focused on achievement. Taking time to deeply learn or to enjoy the learning process has not been encouraged. Doing and working and achieving supports business and the GNP, gross national product. At the same time, particularly in California, there is creativity and innovation. The pandemic has changed how we think about the world and each other and made us reflect on what we value. I believe that we are in the middle of a social, cultural, and economic revolution. When things have settled down, it will be much easier to see how far we've come. My youngest son is in high school, and one thing I can say for certain is this: the pandemic is transforming education in my city. We are finally moving away from using standard testing to show the success of our students and moving toward project-based, experiential education. These methods are concerned with the needs of the whole student as a person. This for me is incredibly exciting, and it's just one example of how people are thinking holistically where I live. People are holistic. Mind, body, and emotion are connected. Performance training in the US has traditionally focused on using the mind to create emotions. I think a sad thought, I feel a sad emotion. Hopefully now my audience understands that I am sad. But the body is not included here, even though the body is the expressive instrument. So now I'm a person on stage with a lot of emotion, and yet I have no idea how to control or effectively express that emotion. At the worst, all my time on stage is spent trying to become emotional. Not only do I fail to access authentic emotion, I am too focused on myself to connect spontaneously with my fellow performers. These habits create physical and vocal tension. Performers who have no physical technique and only focus on working with their emotions perform from the neck up. Think about your life for a moment. We learn from a young age not to express everything we're feeling. Remember the example of the woman who has birth trauma and who's learned to suppress her emotions. What happens to your voice when you feel emotional? Much of the time in real life, you may be working to hide your emotion. When you do this, the throat muscles tighten up and the body becomes tense. In order for us to effectively express our thoughts and emotions in performance, we must learn techniques that open the body, the breath, which is the engine of the voice, and the voice, the center of our communication. We have to unlearn our physical resistance to emotion. And at the same time, we must learn to modulate the emotion for the performance. It sounds almost impossible, doesn't it? Well, for many singers, this approach will seem obvious because singing performance requires strong physical technique. The importance of technique for actors and speakers has been poorly recognized in the US, even though actors and speakers use their entire bodies to perform as well. It's as simple as this. We have to train body, mind, and emotion together, and we have to keep practicing these techniques with an attitude of kindness and openness toward ourselves as we develop our new skills. So how do we get the body, mind, and emotion to work together in a way that also works for our audience? I wanted to solve this question when I began to observe the issues American acting students were having. At the time, I was teaching at Berkeley Repertory School of Theatre. People who take classes at this school come from a range of backgrounds and circumstances. Some are starting their acting training a little late in life while working in the day. For some of these students, acting is a serious second career. These students took my classes on embodied performance because they knew that they were physically limited on stage. They would say to me, I don't know what to do with my hands, or I studied Shakespeare with a teacher who told me I should stand still while I spoke the text, or I don't feel the emotion right now. How can I perform? I knew that in order to help my students to become open and curious, I had to get them out of their heads and into their bodies. When I taught and studied at the University of California at Davis, my cohort and I focused on practice-based research for performance arts, and this was a new concept to me at the time. We explored our own performance experience, we observed, we analyzed, we recorded our findings. Our practices always began with getting up on our feet, moving, speaking, improvising. As actors, we practiced Stanislavski's system of active analysis, which also begins with physical exploration. As dancers, We wrote movement scores based on Laban's effort actions, starting with improvisation. As speakers, we spent hours doing Linklater exercises. These were lab experiments in performance technique. At Berkeley Rep School of Theatre, I aimed to recreate the lab experiment atmosphere with my students. Being afraid of getting things wrong kills creativity. Saying to my students, this is a lab experiment, freed them from being too focused on getting everything right. Out of this process, the inhabiting technique was created. Inhabit is another way of saying to live somewhere. We inhabit our house, we inhabit a room, we inhabit our bodies. The basic idea is that through fully inhabiting our bodies, we can gently begin to inhabit the world of emotion, rather than thinking that we must pull the emotion out of ourselves. Each emotion becomes a place we can visit on a map. This concept helps people to be less afraid of emotion and helps them to move from one emotion to another. Flexibility of emotion is important for actors, particularly those who are performing Shakespeare. Becoming an athlete of emotion is one of the goals of the inhabiting technique. The ability to visit each emotion deeply and to move from one emotion to another very quickly. Inhabiting is based on techniques I learned while I was an acting student at RADA in London, including Laban movement, the work of Cicely Berry, Richard Schechner, Linklater voice and text work, Grotowski, and Stanislavski's active analysis. In the inhabiting technique, this landscape of emotion is represented by a large paper mat on the floor divided into 9 squares, called habitations. Habitation means the place where we live. On each square is written an emotion. Exploring the habitations occurs in steps. In the first stage, students stand in the squares and create expressionistic statues with their bodies to represent the emotion they're inhabiting. In the next phase, students focus on breath, recreating the breathing patterns of each emotion. In the next phase, movement is added, then vocalization without words, and then finally words are added. Movement, breath, voice, and words all come together in the final stages. Students can practice scenes and monologues within the habitations. This process happens over many classes. It is in-depth and slow. Students learn a lot about themselves as people and as actors. Remember the woman with the ankle sprains. Inhabiting is also based on the premise that emotion is literally held within the body and that this emotion can flow outwards and also be released. For example, one person may identify that grief is held in their chest and fear in their pelvis. Certain movements can also allow feelings to flow like joy and so on. Engaging the breath in specific ways will free specific emotions. What this looks like and how this is accessed varies from person to person. Inhabiting includes vocal and physical release to improve the expressivity of the performer. Inhabiting is a psychophysical kinetic technique that starts within the body. Traditional American acting training starts with the mind, using thoughts to trigger emotion. And from here, the body is expected to react. This doesn't work for everyone, and it doesn't work every time. One reason for this is that many people feel uncomfortable in their bodies. We can say that people often don't know how to inhabit their bodies. If the body is uncomfortable and the vocal apparatus is stuck, the body can't communicate authentic emotion. The inhabiting technique has developed in response to the limitations of American method acting. And I would just like to end with an example of embodied performance from the Turkish TV series Kulüp, in English, The Club. Salih Bademci plays Selim, who is a singer. And one night they record his performance on the radio, and he's told he has to stand still and sing in front of the mic. And he says, "How can I do this? I can't sing without moving." Teşekkür ederim. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, XJ. I'm exactly impressed. These issues so important with us. When I was listening, I said, yes, that's it. By the way, in the club, my husband is playing piano.
Amazing. I'm enchanted with the series, and I'm so happy there's going to be more.
So good series. And a special question. Linklater says that when you regularly use images as you practice to add voice to experience, you establish a mind-body connection. You take the imagination out of your head and into the world of your body. Images stir up the impulse and the feelings that initiate the action. How important do you think mind-body connection, images, and metaphors for emotions are natural voice production? I asked this question because I know you use Linklater freeing the natural voice and Laban motion analysis techniques in your work. Do you also body awareness methods such as Feldenkrais, Alexander, and Lezak, etc.? Are these methods important for a performing artist?
Oh, that's a very good question. So it sounded like there might be two questions. Is the main question about Feldenkrais and Alexander, or are you asking about also the importance of images?
Imaginations and metaphors.
Yes. So imagination is a very big part of Stanislavski's active analysis system, as well as Linklater. So the actor's imagination the performer's imagination is absolutely central to being able to perform. And I think it's really the different ways of finding a way, finding a way in for each person. How do I find a way into my body? I'm fortunate that I think I'm naturally kinetic, but some people aren't, but they still need to use their bodies. And so we all have different skills. So for some people, it might be try to, imagine that there is a color in your knee and make the sound of that color. I mean, that's Linklater, one of the Linklater things. And I think that's very effective. Color is a very powerful thing. But for somebody else, it might be just focus on your hand and notice the energy there. What does that feel like, right? So I think there's many ways in. I think that some form of imagination always needs to be present. And then Feldenkrais and Alexander are wonderful. We were very lucky to have Alexander throughout our whole training at RADA. And then a few years ago, there was a petition from all the alumni because they stopped doing it, which I think is very sad, because it allows you to be that sort of more neutral vessel to then take on other shapes and other bodily positions, right? So I think Alexander is very important. At UC Davis, I worked with a choreographer who was also in my cohort, and she became a Feldenkrais practitioner. She still dances, she's still a choreographer, but that work is very powerful. And I've actually thought that at some point, it's probably in my future to work with someone on Feldenkrais, simply for increased ease of movement and comfort in my body. I wouldn't be able to do those things myself, because you really have to train solidly to learn to teach Alexander and Feldenkrais.
One more question, please. I'm sorry, the other participants. One more little. I know that in your works, voice is not at the center, but there are no theater-related participants in our Congress yet. We will include maybe all performing arts in the next Congress. I have been working as a voice trainer, and when I put voice at the center, I think of a few building columns or steps like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. One of them is anatomy and voice physiology. One of them is body awareness. The other is mindfulness. Another is technique according to repertory. The other is musical and intellectual infrastructure and psychology. How would you construct these buildings, columns, or steps for performing artists?
Oh, that's a hard one because I would have had to just write down that list. So voice is at the center of of what I do, and I think that I'm trying to answer that question. I may not answer it quite as you'd asked it, but I think that breathing being the engine of the voice, and then voice being I like to call it the epicenter of our communication. So many of those other things are impacted by our breathing because breathing is part of our sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. Mindful practices in breathing. I do Wim Hof breathing sometimes. I don't know if you know Wim Hof breathing, but it's for health. And he's Dutch, but I believe he lives in Poland. And it has a particular, so different kinds of breathing have different kinds of effect on how we feel, right? And so that ties into many of the elements that you've talked about. And I think that when we have that as our foundation, we're touching on a lot of other things. And I know that you will know that from the link later, that you can move the sound through your body. How does that affect psychology? So really with inhabiting, it's kind of about how do those things all connect? And I think particularly that you can often start on any point to enter. So we can, of course, start with thinking to trigger emotion, but we shouldn't only do that. So it's really like all the things you've talked about work together. And I think that there's an entry point there for everyone, if that makes sense. So sometimes people will be attracted to the repertoire, the music, the words, but then they have to go in that way and then discover what they need to do to be able to deliver that. If
Yes,
that makes sense. Yeah.
I see. Thank you. And another question from participants is Maçe. Sesiniz kapalı İlker abicim.
I'm sorry. Yeah. First of all, thank you very much for this beautiful presentation and for sharing for valuable time with us, Susan Jane Harrison. You just mentioned that with any disability, this is holistic and the doctor will focus only on the treatment, and the cause is also important, you said. One of our students had a knee injury recently, and the doctor just treated it and sent it back her, saying it could happen again. But inside, the psychological injury still continues and may cause a new injury in the future. It's a young age, maybe just from psychological injury, I don't know. As you know, art education starts at a young age. How can we explain the importance of this to students and how can we teach it? What would you recommend to do in schools for the education of our students, especially in the development age?
I think that Alexander and Feldenkrais are two really wonderful practices to help. So I don't know what's possible there for you, but it is about teaching. How can we gently teach the student about the connectedness of what's happening to them? You know, could be they have flat feet. It could be a whole lot of things. But then as they continue to injure, of course, they have a psychology around it. So that's a very interesting question, and because I don't know much about how things work where you are, but I do think questions are always helpful, right? Asking, you know, that's a really great way to open up the students' thinking around, well, how are you feeling about this? It must be really frustrating to keep having this injury. And certainly for injuries like that, we have people in California who do body work, and it may not even be Feldenkrais. It might be a particular kind of massage where they understand the relationships in the whole body. New forms of physical therapy where they're like, in the case of the practitioner that I was talking about, there's a new pelvic physical therapy specifically for men and for women, but also for men. So understanding how important that part of the body is and how it radiates to everything else. I don't know, I hope that is supportive of your question. Because again, I don't know what's available, but it really is about helping them to be gentle with themselves, because often when people start arts early, they're pushing. They don't know their bodies yet. I look at my sons, they don't know their bodies yet, you know? It takes us a long time being in the body. So how do you as a guide and an older person mentor them in understanding when to push the body and when not?
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you